Welcome to episode 10 of Papa Tom's Take. This is actually a continuation of episode 7, where we talked about the march toward fascism, and have the same guest, Horst Siffrin, is back again. And because of the popularity of episode 7, I've asked him to come back and give his whole presentation. So I'm basically going to turn this over to him, and he's given me permission to interrupt with questions. But otherwise, enjoy this very informative presentation. Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Tom, for inviting me again, and I appreciate and I'm kind of surprised, or let's say positively surprised about the interest on this thing. So we're going to go a little bit more in detail today about the history of Germany and Nazi fascism between World War I and World War II. Let me give you a quick introduction of myself. My name is, as Thomas said, my name is Horst. It's an old-fashioned German name. I'm living in the United States for 30 years. I'm retired, and I grew up in Germany. And I have, during my whole upbringing, my parents, my grandparents taught me and talked about World War II and about the time of the Hitler regime. And that whole story stuck with me, and it is also a history of that you are associated with when you introduce yourself as a German. You're getting asked sometimes, without any malice, if I'm a Nazi or if my kids are Nazis, and things like that. So, bottom line is, as a German, you are always going to be associated with a regime that has committed the worst atrocities that mankind has ever seen. And I was born 12 years after that regime was toppled. And so I cannot speak from direct experience, but I have the stories of my parents and of my neighbors and of the Germans around me. And if as one thing I can do, I can keep that memory alive and try to do my best that that never can happen again in Germany or in any other part of the world. So with that introduction, I titled this presentation Nazi Fascism in Germany from 1919 to 1945. And I'll have to take you through some history before we get really to the meat of the Hitler regime. Some historical dates for reference here. So most of people would know those, what time in the history we are talking about. So 1918 was the end of World War I. It ended with a resound defeat of Germany and Austria, as at the time the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and rearranged the powers in Europe. 1929, the famous Black Friday that started with the New York Stock Exchange crash and the beginning of the Great Depression. 4 years later, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. And 6 years later, 1939, was the beginning of World War II. Most Americans will know in 1941, Pearl Harbor, that pushed the United States into World War II. 1944, D-Day, the day when the armies of the United States, Great Britain, and other countries helping invaded Normandy, and that was the day of the beginning of the decline of the Hitler regime. And then 1 year later, 1945, the end of World War II. So the question that we have and that I have, what's really behind this? Germany was at the time a highly regarded nation, scientifically, literally, in arts and so, in the Western world. And how was it possibly that a regime could take over one of the most advanced nations in the world, establish a totalitarian regime, and commit the worst atrocities that humanity has ever experienced? There's no doubt about that. That this was worse than anything we have ever seen before and since. And the question, of course, can it happen again? So I'm not going to answer the last question. I think I'll leave that to my viewers and to the people who listen to this presentation to make that up by themselves. History-wise, I mentioned earlier that the Central Europe was was completely rearranged after World War One, and this is important because it caused a lot of trauma to the German people that would explain some of the fertile ground that was created that Germans would take to fascism in the following years. So what you see here is a map of Central Europe. Germany, that's the darker brown part. The former Austria-Hungarian Empire is right on the bottom right to it. It's like this, I don't know, yellowish olive. To the right, upper right is the Soviet Union, and to the left is France, the green part, France, Belgium, United Kingdom, and Italy. What you see is the brown part is Germany before World War One, and the red borders are after the Treaty of Versailles, which finished World War One. So you can see that Germany lost a lot of terrain, like in the north, where it says Gdansk. There's that whole corridor is given to Poland. Poland was actually created again, after World War One. As you see below, what used to be the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was completely split up, was basically done, got down into Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia, and part of it to Italy. So the bottom line is this whole Central Europe after World War One was completely changed. And the Germans, the German population, as well as, of course, the German elites, did obviously not like this. What happened at the end of World War One is Germany was, and during World War One, was still a monarchy, ruled by an emperor. That's the best translation. People know it as the Kaiser. That's what the Germans called him. At the loss of World War One, the Kaiser abdicated and pushed Germany into a republic, formation of a new republic, for which the German population was not entirely prepared. But nevertheless, we have now a new republic in Germany, and it's called the Weimar Republic. Weimar is a really small town in central Germany, and the German constitution was worked out in Weimar. The reason they picked Weimar for this and not the capital city, which is Berlin, the largest city in Germany at the time, over 3 million people, because of social unrest, they wanted to be, the parliament wanted to be not be bothered by the city population. So they convened in the Weimar and did the constitution, developed a new constitution there. The government stayed or went to Berlin, but because of that, it was finally called the Weimar Republic. So it was a constitution with a parliamentary democracy. I'm going through this. On the right side of the slide, you see the structure of it. It's in German, but I think you can get your ideas what it was. So we had a president as the head of the state. He nominates the chancellor. The president can dissolve the parliament, and he is also the head of the armed forces. Similarity to the United States, where the president is the head of the armed forces, but he does not nominate the chancellor, or he cannot dissolve the parliament. Chancellor itself is the head of the government, so he basically calls the shots, and the parliament votes for the government, makes the laws, and there's a constitutional court. It's similar to the Supreme Court. That's what's on the slide on the right side, or all on the top, Staatsgerichtshof. That's the German word for Supreme Court. And but I have to say that Supreme Court didn't really play a major role in this whole endeavor. And then the last but not least, that's the key, one of the parts of the German, of the new constitution, is the famous or notorious Article 48, which allowed the president to suspend civil liberties in times of emergencies. This Article 48 was intended to be for times when Germany was attacked militarily, to give the Reichspräsident the authority he needed to do defenses. But as we're going to see, it is going to be abused many, many times, and was not really used the way it was supposed to. In the next slide, I'm going to show you the political landscape.
Before you go into that, I have a quick question.
Okay?
Uh, since you were moving from a monarchy to a republic, you said that people weren't. I think the words you used weren't ready for it. Does that mean that there was some level of active kind of dissent, or a group of people who were actively against it?
Well, yes, the um, the transition from the monarchy to the republic was quite an upheaval. Uh, it's during that time the Labour parties, the Social Democratic Party, and some of its leaders proclaimed a Soviet republic. A Soviet in the translation is really it's called in German a Räterepublik, like a republic of council people. So the factories would be governed by councils, the country would be governed by councils, and they would really have the power. In this time, the ruling classes, the military was not happy with that, and they made a coalition with some of the parties, and basically overthrew this government and had established a republic, a parliamentary republic. So there was for some time, it was a few weeks, a month or so. Yeah, it was quite not quite sure what would happen, how Germany would end up. So it was a kind of a difficult process, and bottom line was that part that was supported by the army, by the armed forces, yeah, won the day.
Okay.
There are a lot of other stories about this too, but what happened in this transition is the um, the the Reichstag, which is the parliament, elected a chancellor to head of government. So he was the president and the chancellor at the same time. This was the very first government. Now, this guy was a social democrat. So he was from the Workers' Party. And what was done during that time is the propaganda was like this. Yeah? So the Kaiser has abdicated, and we have a treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was dictated to Germany, and what the Kaiser and his nobilities did, they abdicated, they went away, and they left it to the new government to sign the peace treaty of Versailles, which gave them later on the propaganda method to say those people are guilty because we lost the war, we lost all this money, we lost all these territories. Yeah, they are the one who betrayed Germany.
Mm.
So good question. Yeah, so there was.
Yeah. Okay.
So now we have here, and this is really leading up over 10, 15 years to the regime of the Nazi Party. Each of these sections of the slide is a percentage of the respective political party in the parliament. And the first election was on the left side, 1919, and then you see the time of election of re-election was, I'm not sure, it was 4 years, I believe, and the president was like 7 years. So every one of these was a election where the parliament was re-elected. 1919 was an election, then the next one was 1920. Why so quickly? Well, the thing was they used the famous Article 48 to create an emergency because they didn't like what was going on. They had a new election. And 1924, we had, let's see, A and B, we had 2 elections. 1928, we had another election. 1930, 1932, 1932, and eventually 1933. They were all elections, and they were all triggered by the Article 48 declaring an emergency, and then go out to re-elect the parliament, hoping it would have a different composition, would have different people in there. In 1924, 1924b, the Social Democrat president, his name was Friedrich Ebert, stayed in as the president, but he was only in his early 50s, but he surprisingly died, and in 1925, and a new president had to be, or 1924, he had to be elected. So the new president his name was Paul von Hindenburg, so he was a nobleman. He was a former general of World War I. He had won several battles, so he was very popular. He was a gentleman in his 70s, and he had basically the trust of a large part of the population because of that. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the president determines who is the chancellor, so he can decide who will form a government. So during this time, after Hindenburg became president, he successively nominated different people to become chancellor, and he always nominated people that were not in the Workers' Party. So when you look at the right side of the slide, there are three sections here. There are workers, Catholics, and nationalists and monarchists. So the Workers' Party did never get the chance to become to form a government again. They picked somebody from the other parties, from the center, from the DNVP. Anything that has a D is in here is somewhat means German, Deutsch, and they are more or less nationalists. So during this time, in the early 1920s, what had happened too, the Treaty of Versailles dictated that Germany was guilty for the war and had to pay everything off it. So they got these reparation payments to make, which were substantial. And there was really no end in sight when these reparations would stop. So there was an argument for the national parties to say, okay, look what these people has done to us. They want to subjugate Germany for generations, and the people who are responsible for this is the first government, the Social Democrats and the Communists, and they are criminals. They coined the expression "the November criminals" because the treaty was signed in November. Now, in these different governments that came, what I needed to tell is during this time, the German government, being forced to pay all these reparations, they did let the German currency fall into hyperinflation. So that they're basically saying, okay, you guys, you get our money, but it's not worth anything. What happened during that time is then also most of the German people who were in their 50s or 60s, they lost all their lifetime savings because of hyperinflation, and they became poor. So there was another thing that happened there after World War that was very traumatic for the German population. In the years leading up to 1930, 1932, it became increasingly clear, number one, the Hindenburg would not allow a social democrat to become president. And number two, the other parties were not able to form a stable government. So in that time, and it started like in 1930, the NSDAP, which is the Nazi party, they became more popular. They were formed actually in 1920, right after after World War I, but they never had any meaning to it, anything influence. But they came out and they said, we are the ones, we can fix this. We will give Germany a greatness again. We're not going to pay these reparations. And they became more and more popular. And as you can see, within a matter of 3 years, they became the strongest party in Germany. And when you look at the right side, in 1933, which was basically the last election that we had, the nationalists and monarchists had the largest part. The Catholics were somewhat the same. When you look over what's the center party, They didn't really change their percentage. The SPD and the KPD, percentage-wise, they were lower, but in absolute voter count, they were about the same. So and what happened is the additional votes came from people who didn't vote before, small shopkeepers, administration people, people who had not voted before, conservative people. They started to think that to believe Hitler, and they said, okay, we're going to vote for these guys, which made them the majority party.
So I have a question about that. From when we talked about this before, and you said it today, but I want to emphasize it. So the Nazis didn't gain voters by taking them away from other parties. Perhaps some people, but to a large extent, the Nazis became more powerful because they appealed to people that hadn't voted in the past. Is that kind of a fair statement?
It's a little bit an overstatement, but in essence, it is correct. When you look at the slide here, the top part, on the left side where you see the blue and what is it, the light green there, the DVP, the DNVP,
Yeah.
and others. There were a bunch of little parties in Germany that are not here. So they gained, and all these parties were either nationalists or they were monarchists. That's so people. The monarchists are basically the people who say we want to have the emperor, the monarchy back, and the other ones are people that had traditionally were German nationalists of different colors, different backgrounds. And so the German nationalists were basically the largest source for the Nazi party. And then all the little parties, as you can see, there was the small parties in the around 1930. They had a significant part, so they went away, and they voted Nazi. And we had in 1933 there was this sentiment that we were under that Germany was under an existential emergency. So people who did not vote before went to vote. I think about 3 million more people went to vote, and they voted overwhelmingly Nazis.
Yeah. Okay.
So the Workers'
Okay.
Party did not stay absolutely the same. So they had I think a total of 13 million people voted for the Workers' Parties. So they went up and down 500,000 here and there. But conceptually, you can say it is, as you stated, it is not true that a large part of the worker section went over to the Nazis.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's what the research shows up. Of course, that's only based on the total numbers. We did not have exit polls at the time and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand.
Okay. So this part of the presentation will see how Hitler became chancellor and what he did in 2 months to basically establish a totalitarian regime. On January the 30th, there was Hitler became chancellor. And there's also something to be said for that. Hitler was not very popular with the ruling classes. The ruling classes being the monarchists, the industrialists, and the military. They looked down on him. He was a commoner. He couldn't speak well here, but he was popular. So he had asked to become chancellor again and again, and it was given to other people, prominent people in the other parties. But eventually, it became clear that there was no choice. So the Hindenburg, the president, and his his supporters, his elite the people of the elite said, okay, make him chancellor. Maybe he can fix this thing, and we get a stable government, and then we will go from there. And so they made Hitler the chancellor, and Hitler played it very well. So he was grateful. Yeah, he bowed his head to the elites. Yeah, so he appeared in all regards as the guy who was going here to fix it, and he wanted to be to do his best. That's the way his propaganda. That's how the press reported about him. It took him only two months. In the middle, the means that he used, I'll summarize these: intimidation. He eliminated the opposition. He changed the constitution to establish unrestricted power. So that's the summary. Yeah? And how did he do that? And it's the law. He was able to push through a law that in the English-speaking language is called the Enabling Act. In German, it's more called like the Empowerment Act, because it gave the chancellor the power to do whatever he wanted. Yeah? And they called it the law to remedy the hardship of the people and the empire. So it's to remedy the hardship, what hardships ever there were, and the people and the empire. So the empire is it's a leftover from the emperor from 1918. On the right side, you see a copy of that law. The headline is Reichsgesetzblatt. That means the law publication of the empire, and it publishes all the laws that have been promulgated, that have been passed in the parliament. And this is really all it is. This the law was not even 1 page long, and it basically gave, I'm going to get to this, gave the government unrestricted power. Now, what happened? How did they get to this? During that time, in February, like a few weeks after Hitler was elected, the parliament, the German, that's called the Reichstag, like the Congress, caught on fire. And there have been a lot of things debated out if this was real, if it was arsony. That was sure. There was one person who was arrested for that, and it is. And when people look at this, they say it's really unlikely that one person could have started a fire that would consume the entire building. But that was what happened. So the person who did the arsonist was a guy who was associated with the Communist Party in the Netherlands. He had no job. He was a jobless person, and so he was then used as the scapegoat. And Hitler said, "What has happened is we are under attack. This is the communist attack that I have always feared about. We are in an emergency situation," and he convinced Hindenburg to invoke Article 48, and which means that the civil liberties were suspended. That Article 48 was invoked at night, and the next morning, all the communist delegates, critical journalists, parts of the social democratic delegates were arrested and imprisoned. So you got to think about this. Yeah, at that time, we didn't have FaceTime or texting. The only way this would go out to the population was by newspaper. So which would take several days to get to everybody. So they were ready for it. They took all the opposition out, stuck them in jail, and planned new elections a week later. So what happened during these elections, the Nazis came out as the strongest party, but they did not have the absolute majority. What Hitler wanted to change the constitution, which required a 2/3 majority. The communist delegates were about 10 or 15% of the parliament, were all in prison, so they could not attend. And without those, and against the votes of the Social Democrats, the other worker party, he had the possibility to get a 2/3 majority. So he convinced all the other parties, the nationalist parties, the monarchist parties, the industrialist parties, to vote for this law and they had to make a change of the rules of the parliament, which is also interesting. And because they were the strongest party, they had the right to have the president of the parliament. And he changed the rule in a way that said every delegate who is not present and who is absent unexcused will be counted as present, which gave him a quorum. And then with that he had the 2/3 majority and passed this law. So the Enabling Act basically states, the government may enact laws. They don't need the parliament for that. Laws may deviate from the constitution, and treaties with other countries do not require the approval of the parliament. The law was, I think it was like for 4 years, it was limited to 4 years, and then it could be renewed, which it was all the time. So at this point of time, with a legal, some things may be a little bit questionable, but with a legal procedure, he was able to change the constitution and establish a totalitarian regime. During the vote in the parliament, his henchmen, his thugs, the stormtroopers that belonged to his party were placed around the building and were inside the building, also giving a show of force and to intimidate the parliamentarians, so they would not vote against this because they knew what was waiting for them when they got out. So here we are, and then so we are now at the point after 13 years with a apparently legal process. We have a totalitarian regime. Any questions?
No.
Okay, so here's a summary. The recap: was Hitler's ascent to power unavoidable? No, it was not. Any one of these parties, the Catholic Party, the small parties, would have voted against this. It would not have happened, but they didn't do that. Why? It was more important to keep the workers' parties from power. There was a great fear that if the worker parties would come into power, they would establish and align themselves with the Soviet Union. The constitution was considered an obstacle rather than something new. So you got to imagine the monarchists, the industrialists, the military. The people who were in charge there grew up during the monarchy. So they lost basically their leader, and they did not like a republic. They did not like people of commoners to run the country. So they wanted to re-establish the monarchy. That was most of their goal. So they considered the constitution more an obstacle, and they wanted it changed. The other thing they thought they could control Hitler. And that was part of their arrogance. So looking down at the common man, and they were established, they had their connections, their networks, they could control this guy. The Article 48 emergency powers during this time were used over 100 times. So if you do that, 13 years, 100 times, so you have emergency powers 5, 6, 7 times a year to do something that you want to do. They never gave the parliamentary democracy a chance to actually ripen, to get their feet on the ground. They always the Article 48 was used to go around the constitution. And vote for the Enabling Act was, of course, the key. But what was also important, that is not enough said, the financial supports by the banks and the industry. In 1932, the Nazi Party was basically bankrupt. All the money they spent on propaganda, on marches, make themselves visible, had depleted their fortune to the point that they really could not recover from it. And Hitler went out and got support from the banks and from the industry. He got donations of several million Deutschmarks at the time. I think I calculated it once, it was like $6 million to stay afloat and to move forward. Without that financial support, his ascent to power would not have been possible.
I know that you earlier on said that the fundamental question wasn't going to be addressed in this, but I feel like I need to interject here that the use of emergency powers is one of the things that the present administration in the U.S. is relying on to carry out actions that once challenged in court, either won't stand up or haven't stood the test of judicial review. So that's a parallel that is probably abundantly obvious, but I felt like I needed to state it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'll get to this later on. There's a slide about the differences between the Hitler regime and the current administration, between the tools they use. But yeah, absolutely right. Yes, so the emergency powers is always the path to a totalitarian regime. I think you can, when you go through the history and through other regimes, even today, that's what you see. And the thing is, the emergency powers are designed for the true emergency. But the key point is who defines what an emergency is. And if the person who wants to go to power is the same person to define what an emergency is, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
they can
yeah,
do whatever they want. Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
All right, so now we're going to that part of the to look at the question: how was it really possible? Why did people vote for this guy? Yeah, what happened? And the Nazi fascism is, I've read several places, it's a racial nationalism. Yeah? So they have Hitler came up with this idea, and was when he published it actually earlier in his career, that the key problem of Germany and Central Europe was the Jews. They were, he called them vermin, he called them the disease and things like that, and that he was obsessed with the Jewish people in Central Europe. Yeah. There was, I don't know why that was, what he had, but anti-Semitism in Central Europe was a common occurrence. I don't think it was to the level that they wanted them killed, but it was a common occurrence. So he was anti-Semitic, he was anti-gay, anything that you would call today LGBTQ, he was against that. There were the Sinti and the Roma, there were and the political opponents. Like he classified the communists as, he called them the Bolshevists. They were a Jewish abomination. So the Bolshevists, the communists, and the Jews were pretty much one big group that needed to be fought. So he had this propaganda out about anti-Semitism, and it fell on fertile ground to some extent. Yeah, I'll go through this. There has been some research done about the anti-Semitisms of in Germany itself. Where did it come from? What did it mean? So here's a slide about the anti-Semitism of the elites. So we had the Nazi Party, we had the German nationalist parties, the nobility and the military elite, and the industrialists and finance chiefs. All these people were openly anti-Semitic. You ask any of those, they did not want Jewish people in their organization. They did not want to deal with them. And if they had to do, they were a pain in the keister. So they needed to go. That was an obstacle to prosperity and to the well-being of their class. The only party that was against this was the Communist Party. They were openly opposed to anti-Semitism. They had, well, that was part of their ideology. You know, all people are equal, and so they did not. They openly objected to the anti-Semitism. But of course, that was then turned around and said, okay, you see, they're Jews anyhow. Then the most problematic part of it is, I see, is the Center Party and the Social Democratic Party. They were what they called opportunistically anti-Semitic. They really were not, but they were kind of. They didn't like the Jews, but they saw they thought they had to be anti-Semitic, at least to some level, to be elected by a large part of the population. So now there has also been some research done over the anti-Semitism of the general population. So basically the first sentence covers it all. There was an emotional anti-Semitism based on biases and unverifiable prejudices. Some of it was religiously based. They had killed the savior. They had cabals, and they had secret societies, and all of that was, kind of, they couldn't be trusted. In most small towns, and I grew up in a small town, they had Jewish communities. Sometimes not more than a few families, but they were present. And in the rural parts of Germany, where I grew up, Germany at the time and even after the war was very religious. Northern part of Germany, Protestant; southern part of Germany, Catholic. So in those times, the priest is the most important person in town, above the mayor. But the priest, you have, if you like it or not, on Sundays you go to church, and he tells you what to do, how to vote, what to believe, and what is good and wrong, and what is good and bad. The Jewish people, of course, did not go to the church. They had their own faith, so they were different. By that, at least that's my interpretation. By that difference in itself, they moved themselves, so they were actually not part of the community of the town. Those were the different ones. What also has to be said is the Nazi propaganda was very strong against the Jewish, and when they started leading the government, they made a big propaganda attempt that people should not buy from Jews. That propaganda did not go anywhere. So the people, because you could buy things from the Jew, as they said, that you couldn't buy anywhere else. So they had a well-established trading network. Some of them they were famous for at the time was they brokered cattle. So you want to sell a cow or you want to buy one, so you go to the Jew and he will find you a buyer or he will find you a seller. So that's what they. So they were an important part of the German life, but they were not, apparently, on average, they were not very well liked. Not to the point that if somebody wanted them harm, that they would go out of their way and protect them. So Hitler's anti-Semitism was a step above that. So he has, in his first public writing, from his early writings in 1919, he defined what he saw as the Jewish people. They are a foreign race, and they should not have the same rights as the German citizens. And it didn't matter to him if they were born in Germany or not, they're just a foreign race. So his whole thing was based on this race ideology. They are only interested in money and power. And he called them, they are the tuberculosis of the people. They're inferior to his own Aryan race. And actually, he thought he would gain followers or agreement from other European governments, from France, from England, with this propaganda to help him, and eventually to agree with him. In his proposed changes to fix those grievances, Jews will be treated like citizens of a foreign country. So Jews will no longer have German citizenship, and they have to be removed. there's a lot of discussions about what this removed actually meant at the time. And some people have suggested that he was planning the Holocaust all along. But I am not sure if that's true. It could be, but there are really no indications for that. It just step by step moved that way and eventually ended in the Holocaust. So his methods, what he used propaganda, and he used violence to do this. So his propaganda machine, yeah, and it sounds familiar. He had a hatred against the existing system. You may replace system with deep state, but in essence, this what he tied into what a lot of German people saw. They said the system, the government did not work for them. They were all responsible for the misery after World War I that had befallen them. He had really no clear political concepts. They were fairly vague. You would bring full employment. You would stop the reparation payments. Yeah, people would be proud again. They would kind of general stuff, but nothing really how he would do that. But he had a very clear image of the enemy. So he used lies, emotions to evoke subliminal fears that people had, and he used this violent and dehumanizing language, as I already said. They were called parasites, vermin, vipers, pests, thieves, criminals, murderers, gangsters, and so on. So his newspapers that he controlled basically repeated that propaganda on a daily basis. His violence, how did he do that? So he needed people to support that. So there were two sections. The first was the SA, the Sturmabteilung, that's what it means, yeah, basically the stormtroopers. The stormtroopers were actually created fairly early in the 1920s. They were thugs, they did street fights, they would harass non-compliant citizens, they would threaten voters, they would intimidate opponents, they had street fights with the members of other parties. So that was the part of it. They were not the smartest people in the organization, but they had a lot of muscle. Later on, he created the Schutzstaffel, which is a transformation. That's the SS. That's what it stands for, and I translate this as a protection squadron. Yeah, so they were really originally designed to protect Hitler himself, but they eventually turned into a political police. They were developed and educated and trained into an elite fighting group during World War II. SS, they became the best training. They became the best weapons, the newest weapons, the newest technology. So they were basically the elite fighting corps, and they were also running the concentration camps. And the guy on top of this organization, on the right, was Heinrich Himmler. He is basically the architect of the Holocaust. Any questions so far?
No.
So in order to follow his goal of to remove the Jewish influence from Germany and to ensure that the Aryan race could finally flourish in his mind, he made a lot of laws. He created a lot of executive powers, and generally that is called the Aryanization. And the Aryanization made sure that you have only Aryan people with are part of the community of and that also that the intellectuals are being brought to heel, so they follow the directives of the party, of the Nazi party.
Did he have any direct attack on universities and particularly prominent scientists? Because I think that I know that quite a few prominent scientists fled Germany, and perhaps part of that was because some were Jewish, but was there an attack on universities?
Not that I know of, at least not a violent attack. Yeah, but I'll get to that point. Yeah.
Okay.
So they started these anti-Semitic laws after 1933, and so this is just a brief overview on what these laws did. I have a copy of all the laws and executive orders that I found here in hang on, that are that were done by Hitler himself or by the states, and it is a list that is over 60 pages long. So they were doing little stuff. Jews were not allowed to do this. They were not allowed to wear uniforms of their sports clubs. They were not allowed to congregate with more than so many people in certain places. So it was a continuous harassment, not something really big at the beginning, but it kept going and going and going. So as I already said, so it started in 1933. They organized a boycott of Jewish business, was enforced by the AR. As soon as the SA went away, people didn't care anymore. The Jewish people were not allowed to participate in German cultural and media organizations, but they were now allowed or were forced to create their own organizations, which were legal. And of course, after this was done, a few years later, those organizations were made illegal. German citizenship was no longer defined by who was born in Germany, it was defined by ancestry. So every German had to go through a brief ancestry research through the birth records and had to show that his last, I think it was the grandfather, also the grandparents were not Jewish. Marriages between Germans and Jews became illegal. What happened to those that were already married? That was illegal too. So these people were pressured to divorce, or some of them were later on the spouses were taken away from them and were sent to the concentration camps. In the Kristallnacht, 1938, that Kristallnacht is a German word. It means night of the crystal, really. It is it was named by this because during that night, the Nazi Party, the SA, attacked tons of Jewish businesses in Germany and broke their windows and their synagogue, broke their windows of the businesses and of their houses of worship, the synagogues. And so this went until 1938. Jewish people may not own a business anymore, so they could not do any business anymore, which was a big part of the Jewish income. And then they basically were taken their means of earning a living. At that time, they were also required to wear a sign, like I showed this on the right side. It says Jude, which is the German word for Jew. So everybody who was a Jew had to put this sign visibly on their garment when they left the house. Education. So this started in elementary school. So the emphasis was now on sports, on history, of course, a history on according to the Nazis, and racial science. Yeah, and racial and science is a word that really doesn't fit together. But at that time, there were people, scientists in the 18th and in the 19th century who made research about races, and Hitler used that research and twisted it and made to bolster his claims of a racial superiority. They had to promote a Nazi ideology. Un-German textbooks were removed and burned. So un-German, whatever that was, yeah, any book that was written by a Jew, anything that was in favor of democracy, of rights, they were no longer accessible, and you would not be caught with these people reading those things. And then, of course, then you asked that about earlier, the political indoctrination and paramilitary training at secondary education institutions. So they pushed the German universities, their administrators, in allowing this training and to indoctrinate people. So they pushed Nazi people into powers of authority and into positions of authority to exert their influence on the on the educations on the universities and higher educations. Now, this what happened now is the some of the things you can do, you can push people into submission, and I would possibly say maybe I'm going to regret saying this, but it is easier to do this with philosophy than it is with hard science. So during those years, more and more the German higher education and the research became internationally isolated. Yeah. And as you said earlier, German scientists, they left Germany. Some of them at the time when Hitler became chancellor, some of them earlier. So they left for other countries, and German scientists were not allowed to accept the Nobel Prize. And so what happens is when you could make a whole presentation out of this. A lot of German scientists, especially in physics and chemistry, had won Nobel Prizes in the 1910, 1930s. Yeah? So somebody said German scientists won more Nobel Prizes than any other Western country combined during that time. And that was from German universities, from German research institutions. Of course, this all changed, and any German scientists after that, and that went well beyond World War II, that went until the 1950s and 60s, when a German scientist won a Nobel Prize, he typically worked for an institution in another country, most likely the United States. And I think this part of the effect of fascism on the integrity and the results of science, yeah, cannot be overstated. I remember when I was in my 1960s and my dad came in and told me that for the first time since he could think a German scientist had won a Nobel Prize. So it took forever. Yeah? It took 20 or 30 years to recover from that. Culture. So culture, you're talking about arts and performing arts and things like that. What they did, they created the Imperial Culture Department, Reichskulturkammer. And that department directed all aspects of the cultural life in Germany. Radio stations, media, theater, written archives, movies, whatever you name it, and arts. From what I've seen is that they did not really actually go actively into the arts and to change things, but they made requirements. You had to follow it had to be not negative to the German culture, not negative to the German history and those kind of things. So if the artists were to publish something or to create something that was critical to Germany, they would pay for that. What they also did is they declared it was called the degenerated art. Anything that we consider today modern art, cubism in modern jazz music, and so was considered actually and I don't know if they were smart enough to grasp that, but those were art movements that were new and they challenged the status quo, and they did not like it. So intuitively they said, "Oh, this is not art. That's degenerated art. We don't want that."
Let me interject a quick side. Recently, I read a book on was it 1936 Olympics? Do I have the year right?
Right, yes, that's correct.
The German, when the Olympics was in Germany, and part of that book talked about the extensive filming that was done and editing. And there was one portion where Jesse Owens actually built a fairly strong relationship with one of the German athletes.
Yes,
And those connections were purposely edited out of what was sent out for public consumption.
absolutely. So that was not desirable because Jesse Owens was a black person, and
Yeah,
by definition of the Aryan race, was a an inferior being in
yeah,
their view.
yep, yep. Yeah, it's
And
very interesting.
yeah, and interestingly, there are stories about that. Yeah, and actually, with his Jesse Owens being friends with Lutz Long, he was a German athlete. He was
Yeah,
the the picture of an Aryan. He was blonde. He was blue-eyed. Yeah, everything that Hitler said this is the Aryan race, which interestingly he was not.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
but he had when they were uh, competing for the long jump, and Hitler had a prominent spot in the stadium that was visible from everywhere he was sitting, that he could see everything from everywhere. Yeah? And when uh, Jesse Owens went took his turn to do the long jump, Hitler got up and left.
yeah,
And of course, Jesse Owens knew what was going on. Yeah, so he was so unnerved that he turned away and walked away. And Lutz Long, according to the history, went to him and said, "Look, don't listen what this guy does. Yeah, don't do. He is he's I don't know what he said, but do your thing." Yeah. And so Jesse Owens went back, did his thing. He won the long jump. I think won four gold medals. Yeah,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he was the darling of the Olympics.
yeah.
People chanted Jesse, Jesse, Jesse. Yeah, and I mean, this is how that must have killed Hitler to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it must have. Yeah.
Okay, good. So now I'm going to the part of my presentation where we're going a little bit over what is fascism. Can uh, can it happen somewhere else? Can it happen here where we live right now? And this is going to be more food for thought than actually an answer to this question. So I'll write this book by Madeleine Albright, and she was a Secretary of State, and she went on to teach at Columbia University, and she wrote in 2018 this book. Actually, from what I read, she read it with she defined it with a lot of her students. It's called Fascism, a Warning. And this is a direct quote from her. A fascist is someone who claims to speak for a whole nation or group, is utterly unconcerned with the rights of others, and is willing to use violence and whatever other means are necessary to achieve the goals he or she might have. And I thought that was a very good definition of fascism, and that's why I put it in this presentation. The common themes that already alludes to it: authoritarianism, nationalism, including racial and religious nationalism, elitism, and violence. So you allow violence, you propose violence to get to your ends. You say that you're the only one, who can save the nation. There is a glorified past that is being summoned all the time. That is usually half true only. So that's defines a fascist. So you can make up your own mind. Think about this: do we have a fascist at power right now or not? So I thought a little bit about what does it take when we look at the what happened in Germany, um, what how could this take hold? What were the conditions that were there? And one of a large part of the electorate that is willing to accept limitations to their freedom for a higher cause, for something that they agree with. They say, okay, we do not need elections anymore. We don't need to have due diligence anymore. We are allowing the government to limit this because there is a reason for it, and this guy is going to fix it. You have to have an imaginary enemy. That's a key part of it. You have to have the enemy. In Germany, it was the Jewish people, and right now here we have the immigrants. I'm emphasize imaginary because from every point you look at, the Jewish people were never an enemy to the German peoples. They were not aggressive. They actually participated in the German economy to the benefit of Germany, and they were just the scapegoat for that enemy that people could agree on. We have a glorified past. In the past, everything was better. Yeah? And you need, of course, a leader with the ambition to become a dictator. You need supporters in the ruling class. Doesn't go without this. You need the ruling classes, the elites are much more important than we in general believe they are. They direct the flow of money. They direct the media, what is being talked about. They direct the investments. So they are not omnipotent, but they are very powerful. You need financial resources. Can you convince the people of the elites to give you money? And you need a concise program. With concise, I don't mean it has to be detailed, but it has to be clear and it has to be repeatable. The Jewish people are the danger for Germans. They need to be removed. That's a concise program. You don't need much more than that. And then, of course, the attitude, you have to acceptance harm to others as long as it does not harm myself. That's something that is that you probably find in large parts of the population everywhere. I remember my dad telling me is that when he was born in 1929, so he spent his youth during the Hitler regime. He saw that the Jewish people in our hometown were being taken and moved away. And he went to his mom and said, "No, what's happening? Where did they put these people?" Yeah. And did I lose the slide again?
Yeah.
Hang on.
There we go.
Okay, good.
Back.
Yeah. So what's happening to these? Yeah. And she actually panicked and said, don't talk about this. Don't you talk about this. So there was a large part of the population that knew what was going on, that the Jewish people were being taken away. I'm not sure if they knew they were killed, but they were taken away. They knew it was not the right thing to do, but they were afraid, and they did not want to be seen as somebody who is resisting the government. So this slide is really short. The purpose of this slide is to diffuse the idea that there might be some kind of reason behind the fascist ideology, like a reason, and even let's say, a nefarious reason, a reason to say, okay, that we could relate to. Like he wants to get rich, he wants to have influence, he wants to have, it's basically to get rich or become more powerful. Yeah, from Hitler, I gather that these things did not apply when the largest part of the Jewish population was killed in the middle of the war. The Jewish population of Germany had about 600,000 people. The Jewish population of Poland had more than 3 million. So after they attacked Poland, they systematically started taking the Jews from the Jewish people from Poland and sending them to the concentration camps. There was no reason to do that. In 1943, the German armies had their furthest expansion to Russia. Yeah. They lost. There was this famous battle, the Battle of Stalingrad, which turned the tide in the war. But in that time, German armies were deep into Russian territory. So it looked on paper like they were winning. The Soviet Union had moved their industry back further east, and they were starting to push back. In this situation, any military commander would say, let's do whatever we can to prevent this from happening. We use all our resources that we have to stop the Russians from advancing. Hitler did not do that. He continued to use a large part of the German railways to transport Jewish people to the extermination camps that could have been used to move material to the front and help the German army. So for him, it was more important to follow his vision of killing all the Jewish people than defending his country. You got to think about this. When you would think that a leader of a country would make that, even how bad and whatever it is, okay, now it's time to regroup. We need our resources to do that. It was not important to him. Yeah. So, and from the extinction of the Jewish people was not a pre-planned. That's what the research shows us. Was not a pre-planned thing, but a result of a development. A stepwise process and decision making. You take the Jews, you say you shall get out of the country. Well, in the early 1930s, that was still possible. They could get out of the country. They needed other countries to take them. Some of them did, some of them didn't. But as you put pressure on the Jewish population more and more, ending up in 1938, that they were not allowed even to do business anymore. They had no money. Even if they wanted to leave, they couldn't. They did not have the resources to do that. So what do you do now? That's when they work themselves step by step into that Holocaust and say, okay, we just need to kill them.
So they really were at that point an imaginary enemy, even if they had been a real enemy before. Once you've taken their ability to have any influence or financial influence, they become imaginary.
But they were always imaginary.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was no reason to cast the Jewish people as enemies of the German people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't mean to imply that they were a real enemy at one point, but in Hitler's mind, perhaps they were a real enemy. But by the time he stripped them of all their resources, they were imaginary. They were absolutely imaginary.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the story. I'll go back to this. What do you need to take for fascism to take hold? And then here are some mistakes I think that were made by his opponents that helped him to get to power and stay in power. They didn't take him seriously. They think he was stupid. So Hitler was not stupid. He was, if anything, he was determined. And that's a big trap. And I don't know how would you define in this context, how would you define stupid? But he was determined and he was ruthless. They thought they could control him. They did not believe that these excesses are right. They did excesses that were rational, the things that he said about in his speeches. They didn't really believe that he was serious. Yeah? And his original speeches about the anti-Semitism, they were confusing, they were full of contradictions, they were inconclusive. But there's also a good literature to show that Hitler learned. He had trainers, he had people to teach him to speak publicly. His movements, when he stood on the podium and screamed and threw his hands around, yeah, they were carefully choreographed before he went out there. So there are photos available from his home, from his personal photographer that documented that. everything he said that looked impulsive and working himself up into a rage and stuff like this. Everything was very, very carefully choreographed. He developed his race theory into more conclusive work, and he surrounded himself by sycophants, yeah, which eventually led to his downfall also, yeah, because sycophants, they can say, yes, sir, but they cannot give you good advice. So this is really coming to the end of Hitler. Yeah, where are we? So we have learned now a lot about Hitler's rise to power, the way he thought, the way he sold his theory, and the question that I've been asked: do you think we are in a fascist regime right now? So someone with 877 code. I asked. So I don't really care. Yeah, if we call this fascist is a label that has been used many times in the past. It's been used up. Some people have thrown communism and fascism in one pot. So I don't really care if it is a fascist regime. The important is, don't we have a fascist leader, but do we have a strong fascist movement? Is a movement that supports the leader strong enough to sustain him? And we have to watch what his supporters do to the country, to look at this and not think about are they going to be called a fascist or not. That is, it's serious, but it is almost academic. Yeah, look at what are they doing to the country, and is the label, can you label them fascist or not? Does that really add anything to what you have to do or not?
I think that the things we're doing here in Athens, for example, having demonstrations and writing to different social media, Facebook and Substack and so forth, are all efforts to slow whatever movement this is to whatever it is. And I agree with you. It's not important that it has a specific name or a historic name, but it's important to recognize that there is a movement in this country that's taking it away from at least my vision of what this country has been for 250 years.
Yeah, I agree. The question will be: are we able to keep that in check or not?
And that's a question that only time's going to answer. And I think the 2026 midterm election is going to be an important beginning answer to that. If they
If you have a 2026 midterm election.
Well, it's interesting because when you showed that graph, you said the last election that they had, and what went through my mind was Trump's comment that we wouldn't need any more elections after this one. So you're right. I can't allow myself to believe that there won't be a 2026 election. I just hope that there aren't troops outside the election halls asking people how they voted and so forth.
Well, is that with the money that was budgeted for ICE, and is that so far-fetched that you could get that you send the ICE officers to the polling stations to quote unquote protect the integrity of the election
Yeah,
by avoiding
yeah,
that undocumented immigrants cannot vote?
yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely agree that we have to be careful that anything is possible. And
How do we prevent that from happening? I think that's an important part.
well, I
Okay.
think I certainly don't have an answer. I volunteer to work at the polls, and one of my jobs as a poll worker is to make sure no one comes within the 100 feet perimeter of the entrance. And we also have restrictions on who can be observers. you just can't walk in off the street and say I'm an observer. You have to register ahead of time, and those may not be powerful deterrents to a group like ICE, but they are in place.
Well, it needs to, I think, and I don't know how to do this, but there need to be solid laws and restrictions available to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, yeah, I
Okay,
agree.
let's go to the last. I think I have, three more slides,
Okay.
and so there is are there common threads? That's what really, depending how you split threads, you come to different conclusions maybe. But what do we see? What commonalities I see with the Nazis' race to power with the current situation here? The dissemination of fear and hatred towards groups that are not expected to raise a lot of opposition. So the hatred towards immigrants, the immigrant group is not a group that is included in our or normally included in our communities. They're separate, and these lies, like you remember they're eating the cats, and emotions, their subliminal emotions, people who look differently, they speak differently. There's a concern about this here. They build on that. The financial support by the elites. We have seen this really, really clear in the last election. There's a strong financial support by elites for this current government. The rapid introduction of a large number of policies. So there was, I think, like what Hitler did after he got elected, he just went out and in that emergency declaration and lined up all the delegates and opposition intellectuals. The current administration had the same thing when the day after Trump was inaugurated. I think we had over 100 executive orders coming out. You don't, you do not create 100 executive orders overnight. You're prepared. They are prepared, and they were very, very prepared. The creation of lists of opponents for a coordinated attack when the opportunity arises. I have heard of people in some towns making lists of people of liberals who are against democracy. The attack on the universities to adapt their curriculum to the liking of the government. I mean, it's glaring into our face. The creation of pseudoscience to justify drastic measures. The pseudoscience in Hitler's was the racial science, the so-called racial science. I don't see anything the same here, but I see a lot of science that is not validated, like what's coming out of the Department of Health right now. The attack on the rule of law. We have that. Then important part of it, the willingness of the people to play along. They're just following orders. Just following orders was one of the greatest successes of the Hitler regime. You just can say, okay, I do not agree with this. I'm just following orders. And that is, how can you approach this? You cannot expect a policeman who has to feed a family and trying to make ends meet to risk his job by not following an order because he thinks that is against the Constitution. The infiltration of the replacement of key government positions by loyalists and the infiltration of career administrations with loyalists. A lot of time people think that's not going to work because these are not the people that get into there. They are not experts. They're going to make a mess. And that is true. But the functioning of those government departments, government organizations, is to a large part dependent on, on average people like you and me. People who do their day-to-day job, they know what to do, they have the experience. You don't need to replace them. You just need to put one loyalist into their department. He doesn't even have to know anything, and he can report on dissent. That's all you need. And then you have the free thinking suppression by labeling thoughts as un-German and you replace it with woke or liberal or whatever you want. So those are a lot of commonalities that I see between the propaganda of the Hitler regime and what we currently have in this country. So is there hope? I think there is. So we have a significant part of the population here to voice their opposition, to voice their opinion, to voice opposition. The No King's Day was one of the largest protest marches in the United States history. The involvement of the court system up to the Supreme Court to challenge the actions of the government. That's been a major problem for the current administration. That did not happen in Germany. Germany had a Supreme Court, but it was almost never used. It was new. The German legal system was not used to go into the court for things like this. So that thing did not happen there. They didn't have that. And we have the technical ability to disseminate news and information to millions of people in a very short time. Germany didn't have that. They had newspapers, and even when they started having radios, radio broadcast, that system was held captive, was used by the government to disseminate their propaganda. And then also, I think this is that is important. The democratic tradition in the United States, as a country with individual freedom, people here are proud of this. They say when they say we are proud to be Americans, they mean that we have freedom. And that tradition is 200 years old, over 200 years old. Then you compare that to a German population who grew up in a hereditary monarchy and had no experience with the democratic process. So they were easy prey. And we have here the resistance of the universities. Harvard and Columbia, I don't know, some of them are wavering, but there's a general consensus between the universities to fight back. Not at all cost, not all the time, but they are going to resist. So I think there are a significant difference. There's hope. And if the system works like this, we have a good chance of weathering that attack. Okay, well, that is everything I have to say so far. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to give my whole presentation, Tom. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Do you have any further questions?
Well, I don't have any further questions. I will close this out. I will share with the people that will watch this that after your first presentation, I gave you the designation of superstar. So you've increased my number of subscribers noticeably and the number of views noticeably. So I think that counts as a superstar. But seriously, your message is one that needs to be heard widely, and if my podcast can in some way help have people have the opportunity to hear your presentation, then for me this is a big success. So it'll take a few days to work on the technology here, since we have some parts that need to be cut out and so forth as we were working through the technology. So it'll be some time before it'll be published, but I'll give you a heads up when it is published. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time to share your research with people who check out my podcast. Unlike the last podcast we had together, I had not prepared a closing quotation. I remedied that this time. And I have a quotation that's actually from an anonymous source, and it simply says, if it happened once in Germany, it can happen anywhere if we are not vigilant. So that's the kind of underlying message of our two podcasts together. And again, I want to thank you for taking the time for sharing your experiences with us.
I have to thank you, Tom, for giving me the opportunity. Thanks, and I hope you get a lot of viewers with this.
Take care. Goodbye.
Bye.